The curious case of Washington's very real Bigfoot protection law. There are odd laws, there are forgotten laws, there are why on earth is this still written down laws. And then there are laws so wonderfully weird that they make you stop, set down your coffee, and realize that at some point in history, someone, somewhere, sat in a room, raised their hand and said out loud, "We must legally protect Bigfoot." That is not exaggeration. That is not folklore dressed up for laughs. This is a law you can genuinely point to in Washington state, pull from the official records, brush off the dust and say, yes, this is absolutely real. Today we begin with the astonishing truth behind why harassing Bigfoot is illegal in certain parts of Washington. And no, this isn't a joke disguised as policy. This is an actual ordinance passed by actual elected officials who presumably had other important things to do, but somehow prioritized safeguarding a giant, hairy cryptid in the woods. And not as an April Fool's gag, not as a quirky publicity stunt shoved through on a slow Tuesday. This law was written with seriousness, intention, and earnest civic responsibility, which is arguably the funniest part. But to understand how a mythical creature ended up with legal protections, you have to understand Washington itself. This is a place where mist hangs low over pine trees, where the woods feel deep and ancient, and where the line between wildlife and legend has always been a little softer, a little blurrier. It's the kind of place where you can spend 10 minutes in the forest and suddenly feel like you're being watched by something wiser, older, and possibly 10 feet tall and very fuzzy. And honestly, Washingtonians wouldn't have it any other way. But let's go back, far back, before the law books, before the ordinances, before any modern lawyer ever had to imagine the sentence, "Your Honor, my client denies harassing Bigfoot." The idea of large, elusive forest giants existed long before settlers ever stepped into the Pacific Northwest. Indigenous tribes across the region, Salish, Quinault, Yakama, Lumi, and others, have stories of beings that resemble what we now call Sasquatch. To them, these weren't cryptids or monsters or blurry shapes in a shaky YouTube video. These were spiritual beings, sometimes guardians, sometimes warnings, sometimes symbols of respect for the deep wilderness. So when settlers arrived and began hearing strange sounds in the night, they didn't invent Bigfoot. They simply adopted him. And then, as Americans so beautifully and consistently do, they commercialized him, sensationalized him, and eventually legislated him. By the late 1800s and early 1900s, newspapers across the Pacific Northwest occasionally printed odd reports of wild men, furry giants, and mysterious forest creatures. Most of these stories were a blend of tall tales, misidentifications, and the early American pastime of scaring one another around a campfire because there's nothing else to do. But the stories stuck. They always stuck. The Northwest is the kind of place where legends cling to the moss the same way the moss clings to the trees. Then came the 20th century, America's golden age of cryptid enthusiasm. By the 1960s, the modern Bigfoot craze exploded across newspapers, magazines, and eventually television. People swore they saw enormous footprints. Hunters claimed to hear deep growls rolling through the forest at night. Hikers told stories of being stared down by a massive shadow that moved with too much intention to be a bear and too much silence to be a human. And then, in 1967, the famous Patterson-Gimlin film dropped. The grainy footage of a large striding creature in Northern California that still starts arguments on the internet every single day. People were obsessed, and Washington, with its endless forests and thick fog, became a hotspot. But obsession brings attention, and attention brings the one thing humans cannot resist: the urge to go look for something we probably shouldn't bother. And that is where the trouble began. See, it wasn't just harmless wanderers hoping to spot Bigfoot. There were hunters, there were opportunists, there were people who thought, you know what would change my life? Being the guy who bags a Bigfoot. Because nothing says humanity like trying to shoot something we're not even sure exists. It wasn't long before residents in Skamania County, a county thick with forests and mountains, began to worry. Not necessarily about Bigfoot himself, but about all the amateur monster hunters crashing through the woods with rifles, traps, and a surprising willingness to fire at anything vaguely bipedal. The danger wasn't Sasquatch, it was the people chasing him. And so, in 1969, Skamania County decided it had had enough. Enough of reckless hunting. Enough of armed enthusiasts populating the woods. Enough of stories of shots fired at shadows. Enough of the risk that some poor lumberjack, dressed in a furry coat for warmth, might be mistaken for a legendary beast and turned into a statistic. So they wrote a law that said, essentially, stop shooting at Bigfoot, stop chasing Bigfoot, stop harassing Bigfoot. In fact, leave Bigfoot alone entirely. They made it illegal to harm a creature they weren't even sure existed, not because they believed in him, but because they believed in public safety. And perhaps because there was a certain poetic charm to acknowledging the Pacific Northwest's favorite resident. And this wasn't a tiny slap-on-the-wrist measure. No, Skamania County went big. They declared Bigfoot an endangered species. They made harming him potentially punishable by jail time and hefty fines. They framed it not as a joke, but as a responsible precautionary measure. Other counties later followed with their own ordinances, some with slightly more of a wink, some with genuine bureaucratic seriousness. To this day, these laws remain some of the most delightful entries in Washington legal history. They sit there quietly among the zoning codes, property regulations, hunting statutes, and environmental protections, an official acknowledgement that the woods hold mysteries worth respecting. But what makes this law truly fascinating and truly hilarious isn't just the text itself. It's the fact that a community looked at the chaos brewing around Bigfoot mania and concluded that the best possible solution was to enact legislation protecting a creature whose existence is still hotly debated. It's a uniquely Pacific Northwest blend of sincerity, practicality, and whimsical belief. A shrug paired with a smile. Hey, maybe he's real, maybe he's not, but either way, stop shooting at him. Yet the origins of this law reveal something deeper about Washington's relationship with its wilderness. There's a reverence here, a sense that the forest is not just scenery, but a living thing full of stories, secrets, and maybe even undiscovered species. The Bigfoot protection laws aren't just about cryptids, they're about respecting the unknown. And the unknown is something Washington has plenty of. Even scientists have admitted that the Pacific Northwest harbors species that remain unclassified, hidden in the densest parts of the woods. Is Bigfoot among them? Most biologists will say no. Most residents will say probably not. But some, just enough, will raise an eyebrow and say, well, you never know. And that you never know is the exact energy that made this law possible. Imagine the county meetings. Imagine trying to explain to new members of the council that yes, they really will be voting on Bigfoot legislation today. Imagine a legal clerk typing with a perfectly straight face. It shall be unlawful to kill, harass, or otherwise interfere with Sasquatch. Imagine signing your name to that document. This wasn't satire. This wasn't a publicity stunt. It was a real solution to a real problem caused by real people with very real weapons. The beauty of the law is that it remains both fully serious and fully absurd at the same time. But maybe that's why it endures. Because laws, in a strange way, are cultural stories. Stories about what a society values, fears, or strives to protect. And Washington, with its deep green forests and peaceful mountain ranges, chose to write into its own story the possibility that something magnificent and mysterious might be wandering among them. Bigfoot might be a cryptid. He might be a legend. He might be a bear with posture problems. He might be a hoax, a myth, a misremembered shadow. But to Washington, he is protected. He is respected. He is worthy of being left alone. And there is something oddly beautiful about that. This law stands as one of the greatest examples of how humans interact with myth. Not just with fear or fascination, but with a strange sort of kindness, a just-in-case sort of kindness. We don't need to prove you exist to decide you deserve peace kind of kindness. It sets the stage for what comes next. The escalating chaos, the modern interpretations, the tourism, the legal debates, and the hilarious consequences of having a law that technically protects a creature science has yet to confirm. But that's for later. For now, the foundation has been laid. Washington's forests are full of wonders, and its laws, deliberately, proudly, and a bit mischievously, reflect that. when Washington met Bigfoot mania, a tale of chaos, curiosity, and unexpected laws. By the time the 1960s rolled around, Washington state found itself at the epicenter of something far stranger than fishery disputes or logging policies. A cultural storm was brewing in the forests, and its name was Bigfoot. This wasn't a quiet fascination either. It wasn't a mild curiosity tucked politely in the margins of local folklore. This was a full-blown national obsession, and Washington was ground zero. Stories spread like wildfire across the 20th century American media landscape. Articles, radio interviews, blurry photographs, shaky eyewitness accounts. They all fed into a growing belief that deep in the forests something massive and mysterious lurked between the cedar trees. The Pacific Northwest, with its misty mountains and dense moss-covered wilderness, became the perfect stage for a myth to plant its roots and grow wild. But with fame comes attention, and with attention comes the one thing Americans can be counted on to bring to any mystery: bold, often ill-advised enthusiasm. By the late 1960s, people were driving from across the country to look for Bigfoot. The term cryptid wasn't yet mainstream, but the behavior was familiar. If it moved, people wanted to chase it. If it didn't move, people wanted to poke it. And if someone whispered that you could become famous for capturing it, well, there would always be volunteers. This created a strange problem for Washington. The myth itself wasn't the issue. The issue was the sudden influx of adventurous amateurs, many of whom were more excited than prepared, wandering into the woods with rifles slung over their shoulders. People started firing at shadows. Anything tall and brown became a potential target. Bears, elk, teenagers in furry jackets, everyone was at risk. The forests were no longer peaceful. They were becoming battlefields for people hunting something that, even then, nobody could definitively prove existed. It was, by every possible metric, a disaster waiting to happen. Skamania County was one of the first to say, "Enough." Nestled against the Columbia River Gorge, it was a place where the line between folklore and daily life had always been thin. Locals respected the woods, they respected the stories, and they especially respected the fact that the forest was full of very real creatures who did not deserve to be caught in the crossfire of Bigfoot mania. So, in the spring of 1969, the county commissioners gathered and drafted a law unlike anything America had ever seen. A law that calmly and firmly declared that harassing, harming, or killing Bigfoot was illegal, and not mildly illegal either. They proposed fines. They proposed jail time. They proposed treating Bigfoot as if he were an endangered species. Now, picture the scene. A courthouse in a rural Washington county. Officials in suits, papers spread across a heavy wooden desk, and someone, whose name deserves to be carved in history, reads aloud the draft language. It shall be unlawful to kill, harass, or otherwise interfere with the creature commonly known as Sasquatch or Bigfoot. Not a wink, not a smirk, not even a raised eyebrow. The law was passed with seriousness and intent. And this earnestness is precisely what makes it so spectacular. This wasn't just about protecting a mythical creature. It was about protecting human beings from one another, especially when those humans were marching into the forest armed and overconfident. The commissioners weren't endorsing the existence of Bigfoot. They were endorsing common sense. And in the delightful irony of Washington's legal history, the best way to keep trigger-happy tourists in line was to legally defend a creature that may or may not exist. But the story didn't end with Skamania County. Bigfoot fever continued to escalate throughout the 20th century. Stories multiplied. Footprints appeared. Eyewitnesses swore they saw something huge crossing forest roads at night. And each story brought even more attention to Washington. The forests became grand arenas for believers, skeptics, scientists, filmmakers, and the occasional adrenaline-fueled adventurer who firmly believed he could catch Bigfoot himself. The local response became a blend of amusement, caution, and a begrudging acceptance that when your state is known for being rainy and green and slightly mysterious, the world will attach legends to you like burrs on a hiking sock. Counties began to lean into it, some with humor, others with sincerity. The small town of North Bonneville once declared itself a Sasquatch refuge. A few communities put up signs warning travelers that Bigfoot was protected by law. And of course, the myth attracted tourism. Hundreds of thousands of visitors eager to wander through the very forests where legends whispered from tree to tree. Businesses sprang up. Gift shops stocked Bigfoot keychains, shirts, mugs, postcards and stuffed toys. Bed and breakfasts offered Sasquatch-watching packages. Local guides began leading hikes described as nature walks, where we definitely won't actually find Bigfoot, but will have a good time anyway. The creature became simultaneously a symbol of mystery and a friendly regional mascot. Washington didn't fight the reputation. It embraced it with the calm, slightly amused confidence of a state that knows its woods are emerald green, deep, ancient, and capable of holding more secrets than anyone expects. But the law remained serious. That was the strange duality. Bigfoot was a joke to some, a spiritual creature to others, a scientific puzzle to a few, and an economic asset to many. But on paper, in official county documents, he was something else entirely. A protected being. Throughout the 1970s and into the 1980s, the debate over Bigfoot shifted from, is he real, to, should we treat him as if he might be real? Wildlife experts pointed out that even if Bigfoot didn't exist, the sudden surge in amateur hunters posed a real risk to both humans and wildlife. The law helped mitigate that. It set a precedent, one that other counties considered adopting. It also began appearing in national conversations. Newspapers across the country picked up the story. Late-night talk show hosts referenced it with delight. Documentaries framed it as a quirky but charming example of Pacific Northwest culture. But behind the humor was the truth. Washington's wilderness was worth protecting, whether or not a mythical creature roamed within it. Bigfoot hunters were not always malicious. Many were sincere, hopeful, and fascinated by the possibility that a large undiscovered species might exist in the Pacific Northwest. These people respected the forest. They followed the rules. They carried binoculars instead of rifles. They set up night vision cameras instead of traps. But the law wasn't written for them. It was written for the other kind, the ones who thought they might take home a trophy. This distinction is important because it reveals something essential about human nature. When confronted with the unknown, some approach it with curiosity. Others approach it with conquest. And Washington had seen enough of the conquering mindset to know it needed boundaries. By the late 20th century, the Bigfoot protection laws had become a quiet part of the region's identity. Not always understood, often chuckled at, but still respected. You wouldn't necessarily find citizens quoting the ordinance at dinner parties, but you might find them smiling if you asked whether Bigfoot was real. Probably not, they might say. But just in case, let's not bother him. That's the heart of the story. Not fear, not superstition, not naive belief, but respect. Respect for nature, respect for the unknown, respect for the idea that humans don't need to dominate everything we encounter, especially if it might be clever enough to avoid us for centuries. The Bigfoot law became, in a strange but beautiful way, a reflection of Washington's soul. Cautious, thoughtful, a little quirky, and absolutely unwilling to let chaos roam unchecked in the woods. And even as the decades rolled on, as technology advanced, as cameras improved, as forests grew quieter and roads grew busier, the law stayed on the books, silently reminding everyone that mystery is not something to fear or destroy, but something to protect. What happened next? The modern era, tourism booms, academic debates, media circus moments, and Washington's evolving relationship with the Bigfoot legend would stretch the story even further. But to grasp that chapter, you have to appreciate the foundation laid in those pivotal years. A law both serious and absurd, a community both practical and whimsical, and a creature both legendary and legally defended. Bigfoot steps into the modern era, a legend, reinvented in Washington. By the time the 21st century arrived, Washington state had fully settled into its reputation as the unofficial home of Bigfoot. The creature was no longer just a myth whispered among hikers or a tale shared round campfires. He had become a symbol, an unofficial ambassador of the Pacific Northwest, a furry mascot of the wilderness, and, depending on who you asked, either a genuine biological wonder or the world's most successful hide-and-seek champion. And all the while, tucked neatly among local ordinances and wildlife regulations, the Bigfoot protection laws remained. They were part of the legal fabric of Washington, sitting there with a sort of quiet majesty, reminding everyone that at some point in the late 1960s, elected officials made it illegal to harass a creature whose existence has never been conclusively proven. The very presence of this law created a kind of irresistible charm, the same kind of charm you feel when a town declares itself the birthplace of a legendary monster or builds a museum dedicated entirely to a creature half the world thinks is imaginary. As the modern age unfolded, Bigfoot transformed from a regional rumor into a global icon. Television shows, documentaries, podcasts, merchandise, paranormal conventions, and late-night television programs kept the legend alive at a pace the commissioners of 1969 could never have imagined. What started as a practical effort to stop reckless hunters evolved into a cultural phenomenon embraced with equal parts humour, curiosity, and civic pride. Washingtonians themselves had a very distinctive response to the Bigfoot boom. It wasn't hysteria, it wasn't denial, it wasn't even exuberant belief. It was a subtle, confident, almost amused acceptance that their state was, once again, at the centre of something the rest of the world found endlessly fascinating. Ask a random Washington resident whether Bigfoot is real, and the answer you're most likely to get is a shrug, paired with a half-smile that suggests, well, stranger things have happened. Washington has always been a place where mysteries were allowed to breathe a little. The fog rolls in off the coast, the forests hum with ancient energy, and the mountains loom like quiet guardians. Bigfoot, in many ways, fits the landscape perfectly. But modern Bigfoot culture in Washington wasn't just shaped by believers. It was shaped equally by skeptics, scientists, entrepreneurs, and the millions of tourists who came hoping to catch even the faintest glimpse of a creature whose global fame soared with every passing decade. Tourism was one of the first major changes. People from all over the world travelled to Washington for Bigfoot-themed excursions. They booked guided hikes in places with names like Ape Canyon or Skookum Meadows. They visited small towns that boasted oversized wooden statues of the notorious creature. They bought maps detailing where sightings had supposedly occurred, as if Bigfoot had left behind a personal travel journal. Local businesses saw opportunity, and they embraced it with the same enthusiasm that Washingtonians bring to craft beer and coffee roasting. Cafes added Bigfoot-themed drinks to their menus. Bakeries sold cookies shaped like giant footprints. Breweries created Sasquatch-themed ales, lagers, and IPAs. Some bitter, some sweet, all with labels featuring glowing red eyes emerging from the tree line. Tour shops stocked shirts proclaiming, "I believe," "Bigfoot is my co-pilot," and the perennial favourite, "Gone Squatchin'." This wasn't exploitation, it was celebration. Washington wasn't just cashing in, it was participating in a shared joke, one that held equal parts sincerity and playful self-awareness. People liked Bigfoot, whether or not he was real, and that was enough to keep the legend alive. Then there were the researchers, not the armed thrill-seekers of the 1960s and 1970s, but modern investigators armed with audio recorders, night vision cameras, thermal scanners, drone technology, and equipment that looked like it had been borrowed from a science fiction film. These weren't just amateurs with flashlights. Many were genuinely passionate biologists, anthropologists, or naturalists who understood the seriousness of the law protecting Bigfoot and honored it accordingly. To them, Bigfoot wasn't just a legend. He represented the possibility that the world still held secrets. They spent long weekends trekking through deep woods, recording sounds, collecting samples, and telling stories that blurred the line between the scientific and the mythical. The law wasn't a punchline to them. It was a safeguard, ensuring that whatever truly lived in the woods, be it Bigfoot, a rare species, or nothing more than human imagination, was respected. Of course, modern technology also meant modern hoaxes. People faked footprints, doctored images, and produced videos of suspiciously athletic creatures sprinting through forests wearing dubious fur suits. But Washingtonians took it in stride. They had seen this cycle before: excitement, discovery, debunking, repeat. It was almost part of the culture. Even skeptics found themselves entertained by the spectacle. Meanwhile, the internet amplified everything. Bigfoot forums, online communities, crowdsourced databases of sightings, and digital archives turned the creature into a global phenomenon. Some of the most dedicated believers constructed detailed theories, complete with migration maps, habitat projections, and discussions about evolutionary possibilities. Skeptics countered with scientific breakdowns, analyzing footprints, shadows, or vocalizations. And Washington, the birthplace of the modern legal protection movement, watched the world argue with a kind of calm, bemused patience. But even as global attention grew, the local laws remained rooted in something timeless: respect for nature. When the commissioners wrote their ordinance in 1969, they saw that Bigfoot mania had created a dangerous atmosphere. Hunters were reckless. Tourists were eager. The wilderness was becoming a playground for thrill seekers. The county needed a law to rein things in. Over the decades, the ordinance took on new layers of meaning. It became a symbol of environmental awareness, a subtle reminder that the woods are not ours to conquer. It encouraged people to explore without harming. It reinforced the idea that sometimes the best thing you can do when faced with the unknown is to step back and think before acting. And so, as the 21st century pushed forward, the law became an anchor, something steady amid the ever-changing world of cryptids, conspiracy theories, and viral videos. Washington embraced Bigfoot as part tourist attraction, part cultural icon and part environmental symbol. Yet beneath the humour lay a thread of seriousness. The forest matters, and the creatures in it, real or legendary, deserve protection. This evolving interpretation helped shape Washington's modern identity. The state became known not only for its technology sector, its coffee culture and its rainy winters, but also for its willingness to be a little eccentric. While other states boasted strict hunting rules or national parks or wildlife protections, Washington had something entirely unique. A law that gently, politely but firmly said, "Leave Bigfoot alone." This identity drew people in. Not just tourists, but new residents who loved the Pacific Northwest for its blend of natural beauty and quirky culture. Bigfoot became woven into the very personality of the region. You could find him on logos, murals, sculptures, beer labels, bumper stickers, and even sports mascots. He was everywhere and nowhere, visible in spirit, even if invisible in reality. And while all this was happening, the legal aspect remained surprisingly relevant. Whenever debates arose about expanding wilderness protections or preserving certain forest regions, someone would inevitably joke, "Well, we have to keep Bigfoot safe." The joke worked because it carried a tiny grain of truth. In some ways, the protection law became a metaphor for Washington's approach to conservation. Open-minded, forward-thinking, and willing to take unconventional steps if it meant preserving the natural world. Even people who didn't believe in Bigfoot appreciated what the law symbolized. It represented caution. It represented ecological respect. It represented a willingness to acknowledge mystery in a world that was slowly being mapped, measured and digitized. Of course, the modern world brought challenges too. Urban development expanded. Roads cut deeper into the forest. The quiet spaces where legends once thrived grew smaller. Some worried that Bigfoot, real or not, was losing ground. Others argued that such mysteries could only survive in places where human curiosity was tempered by legal protection. And so the old ordinance, originally drafted to prevent a crisis, found new purpose. It stood as a gentle reminder that not everything needs to be captured or documented. Some things are meant to be left alone, wandering the deep forests of imagination or reality. Even state officials, when asked about the law, speak with a mixture of humour and pride. No one mocks it. No one denies its importance. It exists in that rare category of legislation that transcends practicality and becomes part of the cultural story. A symbol of an era, a region, and a mindset that values the unseen. This mindset shaped Washington's role in modern Bigfoot culture. When television crews came to film documentaries, local residents welcomed them warmly. When conferences were held, scholars and enthusiasts gathered in good spirits. When new sightings were reported, the discussions stayed lively but grounded. Throughout it all, the law served as a backbone. Not rigid, not overbearing, but quietly present. A reminder that curiosity must come with responsibility. And so Washington entered the modern era with a legend at its side. Bigfoot wasn't just a creature anymore. He was a character, a companion, a representation of the wilderness that defines the Pacific Northwest. Whether roaming the mountains or hiding in the shadows of cedar trees, he existed in the hearts and imaginations of people around the world. The legal protection he received decades earlier became one of the most endearing quirks in the history of American law. It ensured that even in an age of drones, smartphones, and endless information, the forests of Washington could still hold a little magic. The modern myth, the modern law, and the modern mess. The funny thing about legends is that they have this stubborn habit of refusing to remain in the past. Dragons, ghosts, pirate treasures, and yes, even the enormous, possibly hairy resident of the Pacific Northwest are all stubbornly unwilling to fade quietly into the history books. And nowhere is this more obvious than in Washington state, where Bigfoot has not simply survived as an idea or a tourist attraction or a blurry figure in low-resolution photographs. Instead, Bigfoot lives on in the form of something much stronger, a legal protection order baked directly into local codes, ordinances, and the collective identity of the region. And if the earlier parts of the story were about how Bigfoot went from whispered folklore to near celebrity status, then this chapter is about the present day, how the law continues to exist, how people enforce it, how citizens feel about it, and how a creature that no one has officially proven to exist has somehow become one of the most legally protected beings in the Pacific Northwest. Because as bizarre as it sounds, Bigfoot occupies an unusual corner of modern American life. He is a tourist magnet, a mascot, a scientific curiosity, a merchant's dream, a cultural icon, and, thanks to a handful of determined Washington officials, a creature with legal standing. And this reality has created a modern landscape full of delightful contradictions, absurd situations, and the type of bureaucratic reflections that only the United States could produce. So let us explore it. Let us step into modern Washington, where coffee culture, tech campuses, rain jackets, and towering evergreens all coexist beautifully with a law that says, in effect, please do not harass our mysterious forest giant. Because the 21st century has turned Bigfoot from a rumor into a protected species, a debated phenomenon, and, more hilariously, a reason some tourists have had to speak with local police. Welcome to the era where myth meets municipal code, a law that refuses to retire. The Washington counties and towns that passed anti-harassment and no-hunting laws in the 1960s and 1970s probably never expected those laws to still be on the books decades later. Many local ordinances fade, mutate, or get replaced as communities grow and laws modernize. But the Bigfoot laws? Oh, those survived. In Skamania County, the original 1969 resolution was later strengthened and updated, shifting from a direct felony charge to a protected wildlife classification. Some nearby counties followed. Others never removed their ordinances. And even where the law is not technically enforced with aggressive prosecutorial energy, the spirit of it remains a matter of cultural pride. Ask any long-time Washington resident, especially those living near Mount St. Helens, the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, or the Columbia River Gorge. And they'll tell you, yes, Bigfoot is protected around here. That's the way it is. But the remarkable part is this. The law persists not because people forgot about it, or because it is buried deep within some dusty filing cabinet. It persists because communities, locals, tourists, business owners, park rangers, and yes, even county officials want it to stay. It has become part of the brand, part of the heritage, part of the story they tell newcomers over a steaming cup of dark roast coffee. This is not a relic of a quirky past. This is a badge of identity. Tourism, the beast that never sleeps. It would be foolish to pretend that Bigfoot didn't become a central figure in tourism. Walk through many towns in southwestern Washington and you'll see him everywhere. Bigfoot murals, Bigfoot wooden carvings, Bigfoot crossing signs, Bigfoot breweries, Bigfoot gift shops with T-shirts that say things like, "Hide and seek champion since 1892. And yes, Bigfoot pastries exist. Do not underestimate the Pacific Northwest's ability to turn folklore into brunch. The anti-harassment and no-hunting laws provide a layer of official legitimacy to the entire ecosystem of Bigfoot-themed commerce. Visitors love knowing the creature is legally protected. It makes the town feel more magical, more distinct, more invested in its own mythology. It signals that Washington takes its legends seriously enough to write them into the code. This means tourism boards adore the law. Shop owners adore the law. Cabin rental companies adore the law. Bigfoot-themed festivals adore the law. And every time an article goes viral titled something like, "It's illegal to harass Bigfoot in Washington," yes, really, you can practically hear the cash registers singing. It is no small thing when a local ordinance becomes a meme, a travel hook, and a conversation starter all at once. And it all comes back to the same conclusion. People don't want the law gone. They want it printed on magnets. Modern enforcement, rare but surprisingly real. Now let's address a common question. Do people actually get in trouble for harassing Bigfoot? The short answer, almost never. The longer answer, it depends on what you mean by harassing. Law enforcement officers are not out patrolling the forest for suspiciously hairy silhouettes. They're not setting up sting operations, undercover Sasquatch units, or launching drones programmed to detect unusually large footprints in the moss. But here's the twist. People have been warned or spoken to by authorities, usually because their Bigfoot hunting behavior was reckless, disruptive, or dangerous to themselves or others. Examples include groups trespassing on private land searching for Bigfoot, individuals firing guns into the woods claiming they were trying to get proof, people staging dangerous nighttime stakeouts near cliffs or ravines, loud, disruptive calls at campsites that disturbed other visitors, and tourists attempting hoaxes that could have caused panic or accidents. In these scenarios, the Bigfoot protection laws provide an easy, humorous, yet effective hook for authorities to step in and say, "Stop, whatever you're doing, stop. It's illegal to harass Bigfoot anyway." Police officers, in interviews over the years, have openly admitted that the law gives them an amusing but helpful angle for de-escalation. People tend to calm down when they realize they're not only risking their safety, but also risking charges for harassing a creature that might not even exist. It becomes the world's strangest citation, yet it works. And so, in a weird twist of legal fate, the law does exactly what it was meant to do: reduce dangerous behavior associated with chasing myths. Residents, proud believers, proud skeptics, proudly non-committal. Residents of Washington fall into several groups, each with their own feelings about the law. Group 1, the enthusiastic believers. These folks absolutely adore the ordinance. They see it as validation, as proof that the government finally gets it, as a protective shield for a creature they genuinely believe roams the forest. They attend Bigfoot meetups, conferences and lectures. They have castings of footprints on display in their homes, and they can tell you the difference between a hoax print and a real one with the seriousness of a scientist. Group 2, the cheerful skeptics. They do not believe, they probably never will, but they love the law because it embodies the creativity and humor of the region. To them, Bigfoot is not a biological topic, it's a cultural treasure, like the Fremont Troll or the Space Needle on a postcard. They support the ordinance simply because it gives their towns character. Group 3, the well-you-never-know crowd. This is the largest group by far. They are not believers, but they are not dismissive either. They have spent enough time in the Pacific Northwest woods to know that the forests are vast, ancient and far fuller of strange noises than any outsider would expect. So they shrug, sip their coffee and say, "It's possible." This group loves the law because it is delightfully practical. If he's real, great, we're protecting him. If he's not real, great, no one gets hurt looking for him. Group 4, the annoyed landowners. They are a minority, but they exist. These are the residents who have, at one point or another, had tourists wander onto their land hoping to find Bigfoot. They are the ones most likely to invoke the law in a tone that says, "Please stop looking for imaginary creatures on my property." Even they respect the ordinance, though. It at least gives them verbal ammunition. schools, museums, and science centers. Way in, Washington's educational institutions have embraced Bigfoot as a perfect way to teach science. Museums host exhibits on wildlife biology, primate evolution, footprint analysis, hoax detection, forest ecology, and how to evaluate evidence critically. Teachers use Bigfoot as a launching point to explain scientific method. After all, nothing captures a student's attention like the question, could a creature like Bigfoot exist? The law comes up often. Students are fascinated to learn that something unproven can still be legally protected. It creates a wonderful entry point into lessons about wildlife preservation, Endangered Species Acts, local governance, and how laws sometimes outlive their original purpose. In an era when it is increasingly hard to keep students focused, Bigfoot is a gift. The media loves the law, maybe too much. Every few years, national news rediscover the ordinance like it is a brand new revelation. Headlines appear that say, Washington protects Bigfoot by law. Sasquatch is a protected species. Seriously, you can go to jail for hunting Bigfoot in this county. Of course, Washington residents roll their eyes a little. They've known this for decades. It's not news to them. But they also enjoy the attention because each viral article brings another wave of curious visitors who stop by to buy a Bigfoot keychain, sign up for a guided forest tour, or take a picture next to the giant wooden Sasquatch sculpture outside a general store. The media's periodic fascination helps keep the legend alive. It keeps the law relevant, and it reminds outsiders that Washington has a sense of humor. The law as a symbol of respect for the unknown. At its core, the Bigfoot law represents something deeper than tourism or folklore. It represents an attitude, an acknowledgement that humans do not know everything about the world, that the forests are still wild, that mysteries still exist, and that not every law has to be cold, purely rational, or mathematically precise. Some laws protect endangered species, some laws protect resources, some laws protect public safety, and some, strangely enough, protect the idea of wonder. The anti-harassment and no-hunting ordinances have become symbols of Washington's relationship with its wilderness. A relationship rooted in respect, humility, and the quiet understanding that the forest existed long before humans arrived. Even people who do not believe in Bigfoot appreciate the message. Leave the wild alone. Leave room for the unknown. Leave space for legends. Hoaxes, misunderstandings, and the occasional embarrassing news story. Of course, living alongside a law like this invites occasional moments of embarrassment. Over the decades, several people have been caught running through the woods wearing gorilla suits, usually because they believed it would make a good prank, a terrifying surprise, or a viral video. Law enforcement's reaction is never particularly thrilled. When officers catch someone in a costume, The conversation typically goes something like this. Do you realize people could have shot you? Yes, officer. And do you understand we have laws about harassing Bigfoot? Yes, officer. Why were you doing this again? I don't know, officer. There have also been cases where hikers were mistaken for Bigfoot because they were extremely tall, extremely hairy, or wearing strangely bulky winter gear. These hikers were understandably confused when strangers stared at them in awe or snapped photos from a distance. A few even reported hearing whispers like, "Look, it's him." No way. It totally is. Don't scare him. Modern Washington can be a strange place. And then there are the true believers. It would be dishonest to ignore the people who claim they have seen Bigfoot in recent years. Some report footprints, some report calls or howls, some report sightings near roads at night. And every so often, a shaky video surfaces online claiming to show the creature lumbering across a hill or a clearing. Whether these are genuine, mistaken, or theatrical is a matter of personal interpretation. Washington authorities do not confirm sightings, but neither do they deny them with total certainty. They simply remind the public, if you do encounter something unusual in the woods, do not approach it. And remember, harassing Bigfoot is illegal. And with that, the myth stays alive because the possibility is never fully extinguished. The big picture, why the law still matters. Today, the law remains because it is harmless, delightful, and culturally valuable. It is a piece of living folklore, a tourist magnet, a public safety tool, a nod to history, a symbol of environmental respect, and a story that brings joy to thousands of people every year. If someone tried to repeal it today, there would be protests. Not because people fear Bigfoot is in danger, but because removing the law would feel like erasing a beloved chapter of local identity. It would feel like washing away a mural or bulldozing a landmark. This law matters because it makes Washington unique. It matters because it makes people smile. And it matters because, in its own whimsical way, it protects more than a creature. It protects the idea that the wild is still wild. A legend. Protected by law, loved by the people, and carried into the future. For most mythical creatures, the end of the story is the same. They fade, they dissolve into bedtime tales and children's books. They become decorations in antique shops and motifs in fantasy novels. But Bigfoot, stubborn as ever, has refused to disappear. Instead, he has done something far more impressive. He has adapted. He has survived not just in stories and sightings and blurry photographs, but in the far more durable world of laws and ordinances, regulations and resolutions. Somehow, this towering mystery of the Pacific Northwest has forged a place for himself not only in folklore, but in government code. If this journey began with whispered tales among loggers in the 19th century, continued through newspaper clippings in the early 20th century, and exploded into pop culture in the 1960s. Then today, we have reached the era where Bigfoot belongs to the past, the present, and the future all at once. This is the era where he is simultaneously a tourist attraction, a conservation symbol, a cultural mascot, and a legally protected curiosity. And that is why, here in this final part, we close the story not by looking backward, but by looking all the way to today and beyond. Because Washington state has embraced Bigfoot so thoroughly that the law protecting him has become part of everyday life. The modern world may be built on smartphones, electric cars, and 24-hour news cycles, but the forests of Washington still whisper old legends. And those legends now share room with legal statutes that insist, with a perfectly straight face, that harassing Bigfoot remains illegal. The existence of that law, still printed, still referenced, still real, feels like the punchline to a cosmic joke. It should not exist. It makes no rational sense. And yet it has become one of the most charming, enduring, and oddly meaningful pieces of legal history in the United States. This final chapter is a celebration of that improbable achievement. It is the moment where myth and municipal code meet, shake hands, and head off into the sunset together. A creature standing at the intersection of law and legend. The Pacific Northwest has always prided itself on being a place where mystery thrives. Even today, with satellites mapping every contour of the Earth and drones flying above remote forests, there are still valleys, ridges, and densely wooded areas in Washington that feel untouched and unknowable. These are places where a creature like Bigfoot could, theoretically, still exist. And that possibility, however small or large one believes it to be, is what allows the legend to survive. But what makes the Washington laws so special is that they do not require proof. They do not require a captured specimen, a confirmed photograph, or a scientific report. The law does not bother to argue whether Bigfoot is real or not. It simply says, if he is out there, he deserves to be left alone. This creates a rare convergence between skepticism and belief. Scientists may debate footcasts and hair samples. Locals may swap stories of strange nighttime howls. Tourists may giggle and take selfies next to wooden Sasquatch statues. But everyone, believer or not, can agree that the law serves a purpose. It keeps people from running recklessly into the woods with rifles or homemade traps, chasing something that may or may not exist. It creates a boundary between legend and danger. It prevents the overzealous from injuring themselves or others. And it injects a little bit of humour into the legal system, reminding us that laws can sometimes reflect culture rather than cold logic. The law stands as a testament to Washington's character, a portrait of a region that can honour its mysteries without taking itself too seriously. It is one of the rare cases where government documents read like a fairy tale, one where the moral of the story is simply to respect the unknown. Modern Washington speaks, a law the people refuse to let die. If you talk to Washington residents today, you'll discover that the Bigfoot protection laws are more than obscure trivia. They are woven into the area's culture. People reference them casually, affectionately, sometimes jokingly, but always with a hint of pride. They represent something local, something that sets the region apart in a world that often feels flattened by sameness. For many locals, the law represents an identity. It reminds them of logging history, of campfire nights, of childhood stories told under starlit skies. It is a badge of the Pacific Northwest's embrace of the wild and the weird. Young people grow up hearing about it from parents or teachers. Visitors encounter it in museum exhibits or on tourist signs. Journalists rediscover it every few years and unleash a fresh wave of articles that send curious travellers flocking to the region. And each time the reaction is the same. Residents smile, shake their heads and say, "Yes, it is real." "No, it has not been repealed." And yes, we like it that way. Even county officials, when asked, are quick to defend the ordinance as part of local heritage. It does not harm anyone. It adds charm. It attracts tourists. And very occasionally it gives law enforcement a way to intervene when someone decides to go stomping through the woods with a camera crew and a high degree of misplaced confidence. If anything, the law is strengthening its roots. More people know about it today than at any point in its history. Tourists come for the law, stay for the mystery. The moment visitors hear that it is illegal to harass Bigfoot in parts of Washington, the region transforms in their minds. Suddenly, every hiking trail becomes an adventure. Every rustle in the trees becomes meaningful. Every scenic pull-off becomes a potential viewing spot. And every lodge, cafe, and gift shop becomes a shrine to the legend. The law fuels this energy. It lends gravity to the story. It adds official weight to something that might otherwise seem like nothing more than old folklore. Visitors love the idea that this creature is so important, so iconic, so embedded in local identity that it is literally written into the code. It makes the myth feel alive in a modern world that often forgets to leave room for wonder. This is why so many Bigfoot festivals, events and tours mention the law proudly. It anchors the experience. It tells tourists, this is not just a story. This is a part of who we are. And the fact that it's still illegal to bother Bigfoot today creates an irresistible charm that few legends can match. People often arrive as skeptics and leave as enthusiasts, not necessarily believers, but admirers of the cultural richness that springs from a single strange ordinance. A law that accidentally became a conservation icon. In an age when wildlife protection is more crucial than ever, the Bigfoot law has taken on a new symbolic value. It reminds people that respecting nature is not only important, it can also be joyful, whimsical, and full of imagination. That symbolism matters. It invites people to think about the forest differently. It encourages them to walk softly, listen carefully, and acknowledge the vastness of the wild. Bigfoot becomes a metaphor for everything that remains mysterious in nature, a symbol of the unstudied, the undiscovered, the overlooked. A nudge to people who may otherwise see forests as recreational playgrounds rather than living ecosystems deserving of care. Some conservationists have even embraced Bigfoot as an unofficial mascot. They point out that if Washington can protect a creature whose existence has not been scientifically confirmed, it shows a deep-rooted respect for the wilderness itself. This has helped keep the law alive. It has evolved beyond its original intent. No longer is it simply a reaction to hoax hunters or a quirky pastime of the 1960s. It has become a gentle statement about ecological humility. The continuing presence of Bigfoot in legal text. The most remarkable part of the story is this: the law is still there. Decades after its creation, long after the frenzy of the 1960s had cooled, after new generations had grown up, after technology had transformed the world, the ordinance remains written into the books of certain counties in Washington. Skamania County's Bigfoot protection is not a rumor. It is not a joke. It is not a misunderstanding spread by tour guides. It is ink on paper. It is real legislation, passed, updated, and preserved. This fact alone has kept the legend alive in the 21st century. Because as long as the law exists, Bigfoot must exist somewhere too. If not in flesh and bone, then in the imagination, history and culture of the region. The law is a promise that some mysteries are worth protecting, even if they defy explanation. What the future holds for Bigfoot and the law. As Washington moves deeper into the 21st century, Bigfoot's role in the region continues to evolve. New generations discover the story. Teachers use it to inspire curiosity. Tourists explore forest trails on the hunt for sightings. Researchers, hobbyists and enthusiasts keep debating evidence. Law enforcement continues to reference the ordinance when necessary, and lawmakers, recognizing its significance, show no interest in removing it. If anything, Bigfoot's legal status is safer today than at any point in the past. It has crossed into the realm of protected tradition. And traditions, once embedded in local identity, are extraordinarily difficult to uproot. The future may bring new technologies, new environmental challenges, and new cultural shifts, but the legend of Bigfoot will continue to stand at the center of Washington's mystique. And the law will remain the strange but beloved backbone of that legend, a reminder that magic still exists in unexpected places. One day, perhaps, someone will uncover definitive proof. Or perhaps the mystery will endure forever. Either way, the law stands ready, quietly guarding a creature that symbolizes the spirit of the forest. A fitting conclusion for an unfinished mystery. So we arrive here at the end of the story, not with a resolution, but with an affirmation. Bigfoot has never been conclusively proven, never been catalogued, never been brought before cameras in a way that satisfies scientific scrutiny. And yet, in certain parts of Washington, he's one of the most protected beings on the planet. This contradiction is not a flaw, it is the beauty of the law. The protection of Bigfoot is not an act of literal belief, it is an act of cultural preservation, environmental respect, and good-humoured regional pride. It is a wink at the unknown, a nod to the power of stories, and a tribute to the forests that define the Pacific Northwest. And above all, it is still real, still active, still on the books, still ready to remind people, locals and visitors alike, that even in a world mapped by satellites and explored by drones, there is room for mystery. The ordinance that began as a way to control reckless hoax hunters has become a symbol of something much larger, a celebration of the wild, the weird, and the wonderfully unknown. And as long as those forests stand, and as long as people gather around campfires to tell stories of enormous shadows moving between the trees, the law will continue to stand as well. Bigfoot may be elusive, but his legacy is not. His story is written in the land, etched into the culture and preserved in the law. And that, more than any footprint or photograph, ensures that he will live on for generations to come.